All right, welcome everybody. Super excited for this masterclass with you all here today. This is going to be a phenomenal topic and also really cool updates of what's being built out in the Lucro software. So yeah, we're going to jump into these. We have some really cool new resources and tools that are getting created inside of the software. If you haven't already been jumping into those, I highly recommend checking those out. But I'm going to hand it over to Adam and we're going to jump in to the compensation guide and really give you guys some insights of what we're finding across all the clinics that Lucro works with so you can really know where you stand currently and what could be improved. Take it away, Adam.
Thanks, Dr. J. Appreciate it. Thanks everyone for joining us. Yeah, so we're going to talk about compensation models. We'll probably start with front desk, case manager, and then associate, something along those lines. You can also bounce around a bit. It's pretty cool. Okay, so the first thing I want to start with is you don't have to take any notes because everything I'm going to share with you is sitting in the Lucro dashboard. So when you log in to your dashboard and you navigate down on the left-hand side under resources, there's a little tab called compensation guide, which I'll jump into in a second. So what we've done is we built the 2026 Lucro industry report, and we did a lot of work kind of compiling data from obviously all the practices we work with, the conversations we're having with people, both quantitative data as well as, kind of more subjective data just from our time spending doing what we do every single day here at Lucro. And we realized that while there's a bit of a treasure trove of information here. So how do we start to dissect this and make it accessible to everyone in a meaningful way? And the starting point of that is definitely a compensation guide. Definitely the biggest conversation that we have with most people is around their team. It makes sense. Team is always the biggest expense line. It's usually the most complicated area of a business because we're dealing with human beings. Human beings can be complicated. And we are trying to, use human resources given the nature of what particularly chiropractic businesses are or any kind of healthcare practice is. Human resources are, the lifeblood of what happens. So we realized that this is a really good starting point. And so we put together the compensation guide, and we currently have 20 roles. I mean, you can see they're kind of listed over here. We've got 20 different roles that we've broken up into quite a bit of detail around how to think about each role. And so I'll start with the front desk and I will go into that one and we can walk through it. Just before I do that, the starting point is more theoretical before it becomes super, like practical on a specific role. And I want to start a little bit theoretical because the reality is every single practice is different. Every single practice is going to operate differently. Especially smaller practices, you're probably going to have people that are doing multiple roles. You may have, someone who's a CA, but is actually also the office manager, and they kind of wear both hats, sometimes even three hats. That's a pretty common thing to see, especially in smaller practices. Obviously, the bigger you get, the more resources you can have, and you can start to have more defined roles. We've built these on a pretty defined set of skills and way of thinking. So if we're going to look at front desk, we're only looking at front desk. We're not necessarily looking at a hybrid role of someone who's doing front desk, maybe a little bit of back office, maybe a little bit of this. So it's built very specific for the role. And obviously you can then combine a couple together if you need to. It's not one and done. You can kind of take a couple of them and combine them together to get the model that you want for your practice. So that's why I want to start just very quickly, a little bit theoretical. And what I mean by theoretical is we've identified 6 primary compensation models that we think are the most applicable to what we're doing here in running a chiropractic business or any healthcare providing practice. Okay. The first one is our 25 to 30% rule. And what this rule is it's kind of a rule of thumb more than anything else. So it's not anything strict, but what we've realized that if you are a revenue producing asset in a practice, so you're looking at people who are doctors, providers, they may be doing acupuncture or physical therapy, someone who's physically doing the work that you are being paid for, so they are revenue generators. Using the 20 to 30%, 25 to 30% rule is a really good way to gauge, are you in line with appropriate compensation? And what it means is you don't want to be paying more than 25 to 30% of the total amount of money that that person generates for the practice in compensation. So if they're going to generate $300,000 a year in revenue for the practice, you want to be somewhere less than 30% of that. And I don't know why I use $300,000. Let's use $400,000, and then it's easy. So somewhere around $100,000 a year is the total compensation model for someone generating about $400,000 in collectibles for a practice. And so that is what the 25 to 30% kind of rule is. I explain it here, based for revenue generating roles that you can clearly define. This person generates this amount of revenue. We have production commission. So primarily for people who are 100% tied to pure production. Okay. And so often this is like massage therapists or acupuncturists often find in this role, where it's like you will get X amount of what you produce, and it's pure commission. That's the difference between a commission and a base salary and or a salary. A salary is usually a guaranteed amount. Usually for your associate, you're going to have some kind of guaranteed amount, maybe some kind of kicker. You want the total package to be less than 30%, 20, 25, 30%. Production commission is pure commission. You collect X, you get Y. No questions asked. That's how production commission works. Obviously, sales commission is for people who are generating a sale. Okay, so they are actually generating revenue for the practice through the sale element. So there's how that model works. The base only model, which is like, hey, I'm just going to pay you a base salary, hourly rate. You come in, you do the work, and clock in and clock out. There's a lot of roles that are very, very well suited for just a pure base salary. Then we have base salary plus benefits. This is usually for people who we want to build a little bit more longevity around. Also, if you need to be a little bit more competitive in the market for more high-performing players, here we would add some benefits, whether it's PTO, medical, whatever that kind of looks like. And then base plus performance bonus. And you can have base plus benefits plus performance bonus. You can have all three, of course. That is applicable too. We're just identifying the base plus performance bonus. And the base is, okay, here's a fixed base, but then there's a kicker on top, which is if you do X, you get Y. Performance bonuses need to be very prescriptive. You need to do a certain thing to get an outcome. It can't just be an arbitrary, oh, well, if you do a pretty good job, we'll think about giving you X or Y. It's got to be something that you can mathematically calculate so that you can then build those bonuses accordingly. It doesn't mean you can't give discretionary bonuses whenever you want. Big difference between a performance bonus or a commission and a discretionary bonus is a performance bonus or a commission is an agreed upon amount. There is some kind of contractual agreement underlying it that says if you do X, you get Y. So if that person achieves that, then you are obligated to pay that out. A discretionary bonus is you decide. It's on your discretion. At any point in time, doesn't matter what role you have, you can give discretionary bonuses as and wish you please, based on how you want to care for your team or share a good month or whatever that may be. There's nothing wrong with discretionary bonuses. We're focusing on contractual arrangements with people around how are their fixed salaries or compensation models looking. So we're not going to talk about discretionary bonuses. So I wanted to start there just so that you have an idea that each role does have a primary compensation model that we highlight. Say, well, this role is primarily suited for this type of compensation model, and then we can build it out in detail, which I'll show you in a moment. I just wanted to start there to just understand there is some theoretical piece that we do apply just to make a little bit more sense.
I really like to think about that when hiring and when compensating is this role something that can be really tied to KPIs that are directly impacting revenue and profitability of the business? If that is the case, then you want to have that role, more commission based. If it's hard to tie a specific KPI, it's hard, even if you have specific KPIs, but they're not super revenue generating KPIs, right? Then you're looking at more of a higher base pay type of a role. And I would say this is something I didn't do a very good job early on, in practice. I wanted everybody to be tied to KPIs as much as possible. And that could lead to frustration for certain roles that don't have as much control over those KPIs, or those KPIs don't really impact the bottom line even as much directly, even though they are important KPIs. So really having your mindset around that first, I think is very, very important to understand the different roles that you have in your clinic. Then, you can go into deep on how to maximize those roles individually. I think having that mindset is very important to start with.
Okay. So we will kick in with front desk. Okay. So if we open up the front desk, we are then presented with some information about the front desk. If you are going to do this yourself, and this exists for every single role, you just want to make sure you select whatever state you're in, because it changes the compensation financial breakdown, because every state is a little bit different. I'm just using Texas right now. I can toggle to kind of any single one of them, and it will change accordingly. Okay. And that's just mainly the financial element of it. Once you select it once, by the way, it kind of holds it true right the way through. Even if you go to a different role, it should stick on Texas. Okay. Or whichever state you want. So the first thing we want to identify, so we're looking at front desk. So the first thing we want to identify is what is the salary range that we should be looking at for this type of role, in our business. And we've now gathered this through all the work that we've done here at Lucro. And so we've got this kind of average, low range, high range kind of scale that we can use. And for a front desk employee in Texas, you're sitting at about $16 to $17 an hour is what you look to pay someone in Texas. Again, that's the annual amount, $32,900. There's the monthly amount, and then the hourly is $16.45. Okay. You can be on the high range, you can be on the low range. It depends on the quality of the candidate, the role that they're trying to do. If you've got a hybrid role, that can change. But we're now looking, blinkers on, front desk role. Okay. So it starts at the financial piece of what you should be expecting to pay, and then we can start to build the rest. Okay. We've highlighted that this is a base only role. Okay, so the main compensation model you want to use here is base only. That goes back to that compensation model over there. And the reason why front desk is a base only, it doesn't mean you can't have other incentives, but primarily it's going to be base only because the measurement of KPIs can be challenging. There are a lot of challenges to measuring KPIs that are realistic, that you can apply consistently every single month with 100% reliability. And then to attach a compensation model on top of that can be quite challenging. This is a pretty entry-level role in any practice. It is not, a role that requires a lot of different moving components to really compensate someone, because it is pretty entry-level. So that's why it's base only, in our opinion. And obviously then it ranges from somewhere around $15 to $19, $20 an hour, depending on where you sit on the scale. Base only, obviously discretionary own bonus can always kick in. There's some other little key points here that we have an operational note for each of them. Just what are they focusing on? What are some of the things that you want to be thinking about when you are hiring for a front desk? My encouragement to you is, obviously there's a whole lot of roles here, is if you're looking to hire for a role, or you just want to clean up your compensation models, go in, pull one, give this whole thing a read, just so that you understand all the different moving pieces that are applicable when you're trying to build this compensation model for this role. We also have roles and responsibility, or primary purposes. So what is the primary role of a front desk? We've got a nice little blurb that you can use there. Again, you can use that if you want to just copy and paste it, maybe tweak a little bit, run it through your own ChatGPT or wherever, Claude or whatever it is, to put some of your own language on it. But it just gives you a little bit of a foundation of what are the key things that this person should be looking to do from a role perspective. We love this phrase called primary purpose, which is a set of phrases that really kind of articulate, are they doing those things? So manage patient communication and scheduling. It's a beautiful way to just say that is one of your roles, instead of a long elaborate paragraph. Manage patient communication and scheduling. Okay, so there's obviously a lot of components to that, but the front desk needs to manage that. They need to help create a positive and consistent patient experience. Okay, what we do here at Lucro, and I know what Dr. J does in his practice, is primary purposes are part of performance reviews. So in a performance review, we list the primary purpose and we ask the question, have you helped create a positive and consistent patient experience? Yes or no? We'll give a rating of between no, I haven't really, or yes, I have. On, you can give a scale rating. Do you support smooth daily operational flow? Okay. Do you create drama? Do you create chaos? Or do you help support a smooth daily operational flow? Do you improve follow through on key administrative tasks? Okay. So are you part of that process of improving the follow through from whatever happens from the starting point? Do you help make sure it gets all the way to the end point? Okay. And so each role has got some of those primary purposes. It's a great way to take this. You can copy it, put it in, tweak it to what your wording is, make it part of your performance reviews. It's a great way to have a conversation with an employee as well around some of these key phrases, because then you can ask the question, have you X, Y, or Z? Because then you can answer the question pretty easy, and it's pretty then, it can become quite objective. You can start to remove some of the subjectivity when it comes down to performance reviews. We then also list some of the KPIs that we think are really important for this role that you should be considering for this role. We do say here, some of them are hard to measure. One of the biggest mistakes that I've found is a practice owner trying to create very strict KPIs, but has the inability to actually measure those KPIs. So then there's these lots of catchphrase words like 70% or 85% client happiness. Okay, so how in the world are you going to measure client happiness? And what does 85% of client happiness mean? It's like, it's a completely arbitrary phrase. It's nice to say, hey, we want 95% of all tasks must be complete. Great. That means every single task has to be written down. Every single task has to be ticked off. Someone has to collate that every single month to see, okay, you had 100 tasks and you did 93 of them. So that's only 93%. So it's like, yes, these phrases around KPIs are great, but what really matters is, do you have the infrastructure, CRM systems, practice management systems, marketing systems, whatever they are, do you have them? And are they set up in a way that they can give you these KPIs consistently and reliably so that you can use those KPIs to manage people? Otherwise, they just become a phrase that you talk about that is great to have on a performance review, but doesn't actually mean anything. Okay, so I just want you to be acutely aware of that. If you don't have the system that can do it reliably, it doesn't mean you don't have a KPI. It just means you've got to be careful how you apply the KPI. So you can't hold people accountable to an 95% task efficiency rate unless you can measure task efficiency. Okay, so you can talk about, hey, I want you to have a high task efficiency rate, but if you can't measure it, then don't attach a number to it. Don't then attach a performance review to it. Don't attach a potential salary increase or a bonus to it, because you're going to create a lot of frustration for yourself and for the people that work with you. Okay, so referrals is a massive part of what we want front desk people to be doing. We want them to create an environment where we get referrals. They're asking for referrals. They're promoting referrals. If we can measure them, create a KPI around it. And if you can measure it reliably, make it a KPI, put a part of performance reviews, that's amazing. Referrals are a huge one. Reviews, another very massive one for front desk. Remember, they are one of the primary people that are creating an experience for patients so that they want to come back and that they want to spread the word. So referrals and reviews are a great measure of, is that person doing that job for you? Are they creating that experience? And then we have got things like check-in accuracy, check-out accuracy. Is that working well? Is their file appropriate? Are things in the right place? Have they followed the flow? Again, you don't want to say, I want a 95% check-in accuracy unless you can physically measure that, but it is one of those KPIs we want to try to keep people accountable to. And then schedule flow. Again, we've got a particular way that you set up your practice. Someone at the front desk is usually at the forefront of making sure that flow is moving. People are moving accordingly in the world, and that they're moving in around the practice effectively. So that's one of those KPIs that we definitely want to be thinking about. It's not an exclusive list. You can probably come up with another 10 if you wanted to. There's no problem. Some of the other roles, if they're doing other roles, you may want to pick up some of those other KPIs. But those are the top 5 that we think would be most appropriate when you're looking at a front desk. Again, if you can physically measure them, you can then start to build a compensation model around that. So you can go base only. Oh, I can start to make 5, 10, 15% of their total compensation model can be a performance based on the number of referrals, the number of reviews that they are generating, as provided you can measure it consistently and accurately every single month so that you can calculate that accordingly. Okay, and then the last one we look at is considerations. What we do here is just to say, as a manager, someone who's now going to employ people, what do you need to be thinking about? What are some of the kind of questions you maybe should be asking yourself, or how can you maybe communicate certain things to this role? So here we look at leadership and reporting structure. They're all a little bit different, but patient-facing impact, operational impact, dependencies on other roles, seniority, and growth path, just so that you can start to think about how does the person fit into these different areas, and are you having that conversation with them if and when you need to have that conversation with them. When you're looking at ascent, so when you're looking at people moving up, they've obviously got to start to display that they can meet the requirements of that next role. So then you can go to the primary, role and primary purpose of the next role. Let's say it's a biller in this case, or let's say it's an office manager. Is this person displaying those characteristics? Can you start to ask those questions to this person, and they're starting to answer in the affirmative, and then you can start to look to promote people. Of course, promotion is always a great way to retain good talent, but you can't promote everyone. You can't have 3 front desk people and 4 years later have 3 office managers. Okay, it's not going to work. You only, if maybe you only promote one of them. So you just got to understand that, yes, most people want some kind of growth path. Hey, well, what's my future here? Well, you got to be brutally honest with people. If there isn't, you can say, well, there can be a future. The next step is office manager, or the next step is patient coordinator, or the next step is a biller, or maybe they can even morph into a CA, whatever that could be. But you can be brutally honest and say, well, that's only going to happen if we see performance at a level that is by the standard. And so I think you've got to kind of build those expectations into the roles. So we have those breakdowns. So we have a compensation, so the financial piece. How is that derived? In this case, base salary, potentially a discretionary bonus if you feel that that is necessary. That's how you're going to build the financial piece. You want to make sure, what are they doing, and are they covering the primary purposes of the role? Some of the KPIs you can use in order to measure their effectiveness, and then some of the questions and thoughts that you should be having around how do they integrate into your practice, and making sure you can answer these in an affirmative and a positive way to say, hey, they've got to work with other people, so they depend on other roles in the practice. Are they going to work well with them, or is there going to be tension, or is this not going to work well? That's important, because overall team cohesion is an important thing in the world. Okay, so that is the front desk person. Again, you can go back, you can look at any state to get the financial guideline, and then you can use this as you want to build whatever templates you want to build.
If you go into office manager under operations, we do have that under office manager. So, if you only have one front desk team member, they're going to take some of those office manager KPIs. But if you have multiple front desk team members, right? If multiple people are in charge, no one's in charge. So if you have multiple front desk team members and they're all in charge of show up rate, then no one's in charge, and you can't hold anybody accountable, right? So again, a lot of these roles and who you assign accountability to are going to change as you grow and as you scale. So yes, 100%, if you only have one front desk person, then you definitely want to make them in charge of show up rate, right? Or maybe like, if you guys have seen some of my videos, I don't have the phones at the front desk, but if you don't have a back office person, you have to have phones at the front desk. So your front desk person is also going to be responsible for phones, right? But then as you grow and as you scale, ideally you can move phones into the back, so they're not, in front of patients answering the phones. So then that would move, to a different role at that time when you grow and when you scale, right? And so depending on, like Adam said, the style of practice that you have, the different types of protocols that you offer, the different area of growth stage that you're in, those are all going to have impacts, on the KPIs and purposes of those roles. So a front desk role is going to have a higher level of importance on a 2-person team than on a 20-person team, right? So understanding those nuances, and that roles are not black and white. You could have a team member who's phenomenal at the front desk, also wants to get extra hours and do marketing for you on the weekends, right? So they could have some type of hybrid, role, right? Or you could have someone who's part-time here, part-time there. Again, that could be based off of the skills of the person as well as the needs of the practice, depending on what growth stage you're in.
100%. Yeah, and of course you can, the person may be both. They may be doing front desk and office manager, and then you're going to combine some of the KPIs together. Of course, that is applicable.
What is the procedure to help efficiency at the front desk to go paperless? Well, I mean, I would kind of break that into two questions. Going paperless, that's kind of dependent on what you have as far as different intake forms, and opportunity that you have. We kind of go hybrid. We try and get people to fill out paperwork in advance. For example, it's hard to definitely go 100% paperless if you're going to give them an iPad when they first come in. Depending on your paperwork, that could be very difficult to fill out without a keyboard, in office. So we haven't gone 100% paperless. Efficiency at the front desk, could obviously be improved by having less paper and being more electronic, right? But it also can add some other complexities, there as well. So, the front desk is definitely all about efficiency. It's all about organization, having different folders. That could definitely be a masterclass, Adam, that I could do in the future, of kind of just behind the scenes, our front desk of where every single paperwork goes. That's one of our biggest trainings we do in our clinic is what we call paperwork flow, right? So from when someone fills out the initial paperwork, where does that go? So it's ready for their initial day one. If they don't show up, where do you put the paperwork? If they do show up and they decide to move forward, where does the paperwork go? If they show up in the paper and they don't move forward, where does the paperwork go? How do you enter in that data from the paperwork into your EHR? What's the process of verifying that was all entered in appropriately and then scanned in to your EHR? And again, depends. Maybe you don't even have an EHR, right? Depending on what kind of EHR you have, it has integration with paperwork flow. So there's definitely some nuances for those, where it's not 100%, black and white, for sure.
Yeah, I think we must definitely do that. We must definitely do that masterclass. They say the devil's in the detail. It's like that phrase. You think about flow of a practice, capacity, experience, poor back office management just wrecks that. People are aware of that. They can see, well, I have already filled this out. You asked me to fill this out for the third time. How frustrating is that for someone? Or they're sitting and waiting and they're ready to go, but we got to go get your file. So those little things can ruin the entire experience that someone has, which is extremely important. So yeah, we must definitely do something like that for sure. Why would a lead chiropractor average be higher than the clinic director? So if I go to producing, you're looking obviously here. So that's 100. And here you're looking at clinic director, and that's a little bit lower. Okay. One, I didn't make up the data. The data is the data based on the trawls of information that we have. The explanation I will give you is that it's not very likely for you to have both of those at the same time in your practice. This role is usually for someone who's very high producing. So they are running the entire kind of clinical side of your practice. And so they are going to be responsible for more revenue. They are highly responsible. I'm trying to get my wording right. They're highly responsible for the amount of revenue that you generate in your practice. And so the more revenue you start to generate, obviously their compensation model will increase pretty significantly. This role is a little bit less about revenue, because usually, and you may think in your brain, okay, my lead chiropractor is my clinic director. In our strict definition of a clinic director, it's way more operational than it is clinical. So it's way more kind of keeping the operational elements of the business going. So there's not always a direct financial, there's always not like a 100% direct financial element to it, because this person themselves may not themselves be producing a lot of money. Okay. Their high range is 125. What is this high range? 129. So the whole range is a little bit higher. They may not themselves be 100% responsible, clinic director, for the amount of revenue that is being produced, where a lead chiropractor is usually more responsible for physical revenue being produced, and that can push salaries higher. And again, it doesn't mean that's 100% right. It doesn't, we're looking at, there's not every single practice out there has a clinic director, not every single practice out there has a lead chiropractor. So there's not a lot of data points on it. So we're just collecting the data points that we have. So, you can kind of look at both from a leadership perspective. What do you kind of want the person that you want, whether it's a clinic director or a lead chiropractor? Maybe it's a little bit of a hybrid. Look at both, take the components you like, and then build your compensation model from there. That's a pretty normal thing to do. Okay, so let's move on to case manager. Okay, Matt, I'll come to you in a second on that question. Okay, case manager is sales. So predominantly sales commission focused. So that's why the tag here is sales commission, meaning the bulk of their compensation model should be tied directly to sales. So some percentage of sales goes to their compensation model. Okay, so that's very, we don't generally want a base salary here at all, but there's on-ramp periods. You can often do a guaranteed amount. I think it does say it here somewhere. Where did I say it? Okay, so over here. So for a newly hired or less established candidate, it may be appropriate to use a temporary ramp structure or onboarding support if needed. So you can give them a little bit of a base salary for the first 6 months to get them immersed into the world. You don't have to start day one. Okay, you got 100% commission, but you do want to, over a period of time, really good case managers, you want them to be predominantly sales commission driven. So they are going to earn based on what they generate. Again, I don't want to go into all the different features here. We're looking at about $80,000 a year compensation model. Again, this is very variable, okay? Because it's usually tied to sales. So it's how effective are they? You can get practices that have extremely effective case managers that could be earning $150,000 a year. You get practices that don't have very effective case managers that are scraping $70,000 a year, okay? It all depends on how effective they are. This role is almost directly tied to production output, i.e. sales output, okay? We'll talk about that as over here. So low base or an onboarding draw, primarily sales commission, and then you may also include benefits on top of that if you want to be more competitive or if you're trying to build something more long-term sustainable for someone, and that may be another tool that you use. Benefits, by and large, are a tool that we use to create more competitive structures, compensation models for people, and to get people to have a longer sense of longevity with the practice. It's a caring mechanism. Hey, we're gonna take care of you, you're part of our world. So you get them to want to be immersed in that kind of environment. That's where we're going to use benefits the most. Okay, primary purposes. Okay, they lead the patient sales process. Pretty simple. Like their job is to get people to say yes to whatever it is you're trying to sell them. Care plans, whatever it may look like. Their job is to get people to say yes and get the money to be on the table in the bank. Okay. They want to have high conversion rates. They want to help patients understand the value of care. So they're usually the bridge between, someone's got a notional idea that this is going to be helpful. They're usually the person who bridges that gap to get them to understand that, yes, this is what I need in my life right now to make my life better. They obviously contribute directly to everything revenue generating, and then they operate within the system and structure that you have in your practice. KPIs, usually the biggest one is close rate and revenue collection. Those are the two that we kind of are going to look at definitely the most and the most comprehensive. Hey, what was your close rate and how much revenue did you produce? Okay, usually the close rate shows how effective they are at selling. The revenue is what you usually tie the compensation to. They're going to earn X% of that revenue. There's pretty much no role that we believe, other than you as the business owner, that should be earning more than 30% of what they generate. Okay, it's very hard to build a highly scalable and profitable practice if parts of your team are earning more than 30% of the revenue that they produce. So I just want to go back a step. That's why we usually want to still land within that 25 to 30% world. That's our rule of thumb that we apply, especially to producing roles. So again, clinical people or case managers. If you go much higher than 30%, you're going to erode massively into the potential profitability you have. And I'm not saying that a case manager should earn 30% of what they generate. Not at all. It's actually a lot less than that, sub 10% of what they generate. What I'm just trying to get you to understand is at no point should anyone be much higher than 30% of the revenue that they can generate. Why can't they be 30%? Well, if they're 30% and the clinical provider is 30%, 60% of all the money that you have generated is gone before it even hits anything else. Okay, so how are you going to be profitable on top of that? So you just got to understand that case managers are usually sub 10% commissions, and are usually somewhere closer to 5, 6, 7% commissions with some kickers on volume. So if they hit a certain volume level, they can get as high as maybe 10%. I have seen 12% work. I've seen people try to make 20% work, and it doesn't work for very long because it's very hard to scale and be profitable long term. Okay, some KPIs again. Okay, so we spoke about that. Case value is a big one. This one was actually, I remember having a conversation with Dr. J, maybe been 2 years ago now, where in his practice, very high close rate, a good revenue number, and was trying to figure out, well, how do we get better? How do we continue to improve this as good, effective business owners are trying to do? And one of the identifying points was, well, what if we try and increase the overall case value through trying to promote higher case options? So he measured it in his practice. It was long ago enough now, I can't remember the numbers. The average amount for a case value was, I'm going to use an arbitrary number, $10,000. Well, what if we try to make the average 12? What if we made the average 13,000 and we built models around that? Yes, we may take a knock to close rate. We may take a knock, well, probably only to close rate. But if our close rate's still very good, our overall revenue generation may pick up. And that was what happened in his practice. So looking at case value is another important thing to consider. Completion, i.e., just did the person kind of go all the way through that proposed case plan that they had. This one is important because when you don't attach some kind of compensation element to completion, you run the risk of a case manager going a little bit rogue and just selling whatever package and not caring whether the person actually completes it. Could have a high refund rate, high cancellation rate, and the downstream effects of that are pretty high. So you want to keep aware of the level of completion of anything that a case manager is selling. Also because case managers can at times be somewhat removed from that element. Like most salespeople, the minute the person says, yes, I want to do it, their brain kind of turns off and they start thinking about the next person to say yes. They're not heavily incentivized to stay engaged throughout the journey that this patient is going to be in the practice. So building that back into some of the KPIs they have, some of the things that you're talking about, things that you're measuring is extremely helpful. And then the other one we have here is lead follow-up. Again, someone says no, or there's a lead. Are they actively kind of pursuing these leads? Well, I've read this thing before, that I think online, the average buyer takes like 16 touch points or something stupid for them to actually say yes to something. That's very different to, an in-person healthcare service. I understand that, but lead follow-up is an important thing. So if it is not the role of the case manager, then it's got to be someone's role. Often it's usually better overseen by the case manager because they're directly incentivized if the follow-up is successful. So those are the top 5 that we kind of look at in terms of KPIs, and then considerations very similar to what we did in for the other roles is the leadership, patient-facing revenue, dependencies, seniority, and growth. What does that look like for them? How can you start to kind of think about those different components for that role? Okay, so that's a case manager. Probably the biggest element of a case manager, before I close it, that I would say that I've seen Dr. J do differently to what a lot of people do, and it can be a contentious issue depending who you talk to, is Dr. J really does believe that this should be a doctor. the primary case manager, someone who's doing sales, should be a doctor as opposed to someone who's more sales orientated. And it's been very successful for him. I'll let him talk into that if he wants to anymore. There is a lot of thought around, we'll just get someone who's good at sales. I think there is a conversation to be had about it. There are pros and cons to either. I know he sits in the camp of, have a doctor do it because you are a clinical provider. You are providing something that requires that level of expertise. So you should lead with that and not lead with just a salesperson to then follow up with the part that the person's really there for. Dr. J, you want to add anything on that?
Yeah, I think that if you're doing care plans in your clinic, then that's the number one most important role that's going to have the biggest impact on revenue. And so I think giving it to, $20 an hour person, is just not the best decision for the overall revenue of your clinic. I think you as the owner, CEO, I mean, that's really should be one of the last things that you give up as you can transition into that CEO role, because that's where most of your revenue flows through, that reported findings visit is so vital. So I think it's one that I've myself made the mistake giving up too early, and I think other people have given it up too early, just because the impact that it does have on your practice.
Thank you. This is wrong. I've now, as I read it, that is wrong. It's typically between 8 and 10% of the initial case value. So I do apologize for that sales commission piece over there. I'll get it updated in the next 24 hours. Easy. This part here is total compensation. Okay. So you want to just keep, and I'll make sure I reword this if it doesn't make full sense. You never want compensation to exceed 30% total compensation. For a sales commission role, somewhere between 8 and 10% of initial case value is the top end of where you should be. You shouldn't be much higher than that at any point in time. Okay. Any other questions, Dr. J? Anything from you or anyone else on case manager?
No, I think you hit it pretty well, as far as the importance of that role. And again, similar flow, depending on where you're at in practice, where you're at in flow, you need a team member to do the initial consultation history, then a doctor comes in, for the financials, on the first visit or on the second visit. So again, this is not a black and white thing. And I think that's what I've really learned for myself as well is don't try and make a lot of these people roles black and white, because it can become very frustrating for you. Just understanding that there is a lot more gray in dealing with people and dealing with humans, I think just allows you to have a little less stress trying to make something exactly perfect, and understanding that there are going to be nuances, to people, to roles, to KPIs. And especially if you're trying to grow, you're going to go through those nuances at a fast clip. Right. So what you did 6 months ago might not be the best decision right now, and trying to keep up with those changes, and then also allowing opportunity for growth for your team members. As Adam said, if there's people that want to move and progress within your organization, you want to provide them with those opportunities. Now, everyone can't move and progress. That just wouldn't make sense logically. So you really need to have opportunities for people that want to progress.
Agreed. Okay, we're going to move on to associate chiropractor. We ready for that one? Anything else you want to add?
No, let's go.
Okay. So associate chiropractor is a revenue producing member of your team. So that 25 to 30% rule is what we're going to apply from a compensation structural overview. Looking at about $85,000, again, in Texas, you can range it where you want, about $85,000 a year earning capacity for an associate chiropractor. They can have all three tiers for sure, i.e. base salary, variable comp, and benefits. The variable comp is where it gets interesting, because this is, and we've spoken about this before, in the previous compensation conversation we've had about the type of associate chiropractor that you have. And you're either going to have a primarily sales orientated, associate, or you're going to have a primarily care orientated associate. So the sales orientated, where you're putting more emphasis on conversions, I upgrades in care plans, or them actually doing the selling process in part of your care plans. So their major focus is generating new revenue or continuing to generate new revenue. Or you have a chiropractor that's more care focused, where you have those systems in place, you've got a case manager, you've got those dialed down, you've got people coming in, and their job is just unbelievable care and retention. Those are the two kind of polar opposites, if I want to say it, that extreme versions of what an associate chiropractor could be. So very sales or very care oriented. Obviously, people are going to operate somewhere in the middle of that continuum. And by and large, the more you are on the sales side of the coin, the higher your variable comp should be and can be in order to promote performance. So what you're saying is, well, your job is to get more people to convert to, either different modalities or new care plans or whatever it may be. So we're going to attach a higher level of your compensation model to that desired outcome. Okay. Or on the converse, you're a care, you mainly focused on care, which means we just want to make sure that you do an incredible job caring for our patients and retention is high. So there isn't this need for you to be selling or converting. So then why would you attach a compensation model to that? That's a misalignment of a compensation model to the actions that someone is doing. And in that case, you would go higher on the base salary and lower on any variable compensation model, because that just makes sense given the nature of the role. So that it is important for you to start to distinguish that for the role of this particular associate in your practice. You may have a world where you have an associate who is high on sales and an associate who is more on care, and then they can have different compensation models. That's perfectly normal. That's perfectly okay. It's about what works for you. It's about what works for the individual, and it's creating that environment for them. The worst thing that you can do is create a compensation model that is misaligned to the function the person is fulfilling, because that is extremely frustrating for you, because you're going to be paying either too much money for something that isn't happening, and it's going to be extremely frustrating for them because they're going to be wanting more money for something they're incapable of doing. Okay, so you want to ensure that you get good alignment between those two. Again, benefits is a huge part of how you can, bolster up compensation plans for your employees. Okay. Primary roles, there they are. I'm not going to dive into too much detail on them. The primary purpose may be tweaked slightly based on what I've just spoken about. Don't want to flog a dead horse, sales or not. You may want to tweak the primary purposes a little bit just to cater for that. And then KPIs usually don't change a ton. Obviously, if you hire on the sales side, it could be conversion rate. You could bump up conversion rate a little bit higher. You could even add revenue to this. You can go look at the case manager, pull some of those ones from the case manager: collections, revenue, close rate, conversions. That could be higher up if it was more sales orientated. This one is built a little bit more care orientated, because we obviously had to choose a path to go. So it's a little bit more baseline, like you're just doing your job. So collections, volume, retention, really, really high. Do they got the right volume? Collections and volume are usually tied pretty closely together. Where there is a differentiation between collections and volume becomes down to pricing. And if you have a flexible pricing model, i.e. you're allowing people to, have massive volume discounts, so the more they come, the less they pay. You can have quite a big discrepancy between collections and volume, i.e. you could have one provider collecting less but doing more than another provider who's doing less but collecting more. That can happen. That's a whole pricing conversation. I don't want to have it right here, but that's why collections and volumes are two separate KPIs. They're not one, because price makes a difference. It's easy to get someone to come in 10 times if you charge them for 3. It's much harder to get them to come in 10 times if you charge them 14. Okay, so you want to make sure that you are not just measuring one or the other, because they may be the same coin, but there are two distinct sides that you want to make sure that you are taking care of. Retention is obviously a huge factor for any provider, any clinical provider. Are they creating an environment where people want to come back and want to finish care, and if not, continue care in, if you have wellness programs and things like that. Conversion rate, if it is applicable, you can look into that. And then referrals, another great way for them to see, for you to see, are they generating or are they creating the experience that you want them to create in your practice? Again, don't want to flog a dead horse, but you've got to, if you're going to use any of these as part of this variable comp structure. So you may say, here's your base salary, and then I will pay you. A pretty common one is, hey, you're going to, let's say we want you to do, 175 or 200 adjustments a week, but for every adjustment over 175, you can earn a compensation, some kind of variable comp, X percentage of those collections. You can do that. That's perfectly normal. You've just got to make sure that you then have a reliable system to measure collections, measure volume. Is your EHR up to date? Is it being managed properly? You go back to the conversation earlier about paper flow. Are all those things downstream happening that then allow you to get that outcome? The last thing you want to be doing is spending hours and hours and hours at the end of a month trying to calculate variable compensation models to eventually get it wrong and then have to sit down with someone and have a conversation, and they're saying X, you're saying Y. You got to try find middle ground. It's energy sapping, it's time sapping, it's not where you want to be as a practice owner at all. So before you jump into, and I've said it, but I'm going to say it again, before you jump into these fancy KPI terms and I want X, Y, and Z for you to do, you got to make sure that they can actually be measured in a reliable way, and not like, oh, I'm sure we can measure it. Like we have an EHR, I'm sure we can do it. No, go and physically run the report that you're going to use to do this. Make sure it works long before you say yes. And I'm saying that from a lot of experience building these things. And then 3 months down the pipes, the person that has this expectation they're going to earn X, you calculate Y, there's a discrepancy, you can't find the middle ground because the data is not good enough, and you end up spending tons and tons of time talking about a topic that was avoidable from the beginning, that is adding no actual value to your practice at all. Considerations, they're those ones again, you can kind of read through them. Where do they fit into the world in your practice? Most important thing for me and an associate chiropractor is just really trying to identify sales, care, what side of that scale do they predominantly sit on, because that's going to make a big difference in how you build their compensation model.
I think you're spot on, like you said, about the associate doctor. It's really just understanding what their role is, if they're primarily, clinical and adjusting patients, or if they're more involved, from a sales perspective. I know that was kind of a little bit of a question that Dr. Matt had a little bit, where he was saying that he has one doctor right now producing $800,000 a year annually. He wants to be more in charge of selling packages and kind of hand those patients off to other doctors. So again, that's very, very similar, where you're kind of in this hybrid role where at first you have somebody who's very hands-on, lots of adjusting, then they start doing more sales. You find out they're really good at sales, so you want to do more and more sales, but then maybe their compensation had to do with the amount of production or how many, revenue they're generating from their adjusting. Then you need to transition the compensation model to, percentage of revenue that's being generated from their sales, but maybe they're still also doing partial adjusting. So they're in this like hybrid role, of some adjusting, some sales. And so you have, maybe commission models, or revenue sharing models for both sides of the coin. And then eventually maybe you scale big enough where they can be full-time sales, and you have other people that are full-time, adjusting. Or, maybe you do a completely different model where you have all your doctors do everything. You have your doctors have their own patients, they do adjusting and they do sales. And that's a different model versus multiple doctors, patients see everybody, they're shared, and they can be adjusted by any doctor, on any visit. So again, those nuances are important as well based on the structural setup. Right now we do the model where everybody sees everybody. And I think that worked the best, for me as I scaled and grew, because I had a very difficult time finding associate doctors, especially associate doctors that also were competent at doing sales. So I really had to scale it that way. And now if you have people that are good at sales and they're good at, clinical care, I think having that hybrid role where they own their own patients can be really, really great for retention, right? So there's going to be benefits of both sides. I think everybody sharing patients, I don't think is nearly as good for retention, because they don't have that one single point of contact that really ties them down to the practice. When they want to quit care, they're quitting a practice, versus quitting a person or quitting a relationship. Makes it definitely more difficult to drop out of care when you're really connected with a specific individual. So again, different styles of practice, different timelines of growth are going to have big impacts on these different roles as well.
I do a lot of coaching, sport coaching, and there's this phrase that I don't know, I think is so true. It's there's very rarely is there a wrong decision, and often the best decision is the one that you can execute the best. So it's not the one that looks good on paper. It's not the one that, theoretically is the best. The best decision is the one that you can execute the best. And so what we're trying to do here is give you as much information as we can so that you can work out, okay, if I take all of this information and apply it to my set of circumstances, so the uniqueness of my practice, what I'm trying to do, the people I have, what can I execute the best? What nuggets can I take out of this to compile to make mine the best it can be? Is it copy and paste 100%? Very rarely. Amazing if it does work out that you can just choose one of them and, oh, it's perfect. You just copy paste and it just goes. Great. Like, we're super happy that it is. I would be surprised if it is. It's got to be some level of, hey, I'm the business owner. I've got to make a decision that I believe is going to be the most executable. And my analogy in the sports world is, you've got, how many NFL teams are there again? 32? How many?
32, yeah.
Yes, nailed it. Okay, so you got 32, you got 16 games being played, which means you've got 32 teams, and all 32 of them have a different approach to the game, and only 50% of them are going to win. Okay, so you're only going to have a 50% win rate. And at the end of all of that, only one team is going to win the Super Bowl. So, but you cannot tell me that, okay, half those teams that lost that week had a bad plan. No, like all the teams that didn't win the Super Bowl, they didn't have a bad plan. They didn't have wrong decisions. They just weren't as good as executing them as the teams that won more games and won their conference and went and won the Super Bowl. Okay, it comes down to execution. Most of the plans are good. Most of the ideas you have are good, most likely. And it comes down to execution. And we're just trying to give you as much information so that your execution can be more predictable and that you can get a good outcome. And that's why Dr. J is saying, hey, I've experienced this to be better, because he's got the execution of shared providers down to a little bit of a science, and it works really well. That doesn't mean it's going to work for everyone. And so just keep that in mind. Okay, so the last thing I want to I'll just show you here, we've got lead chiropractor, associate chiropractor, nurse practitioner. We've got physical therapy, massage therapist, and acupuncturist. Those are the 6 roles we have under revenue producing. We've got a front desk, patient coordinator, new patient coordinator. Some of them are quite similar. I know that, but there are slight tweaks in some of them. So you can kind of look at them and take what you need. We've got an office manager, back office, and billing coordinator. We've got a case manager and a marketing coordinator. We have chiropractic assistant, therapy tech, rehab, and x-ray technicians. And then on the leadership side, we have a clinical director and a director of operations. Again, on the leadership side, those 2 roles are for, very high performing big practices, multiple people. The standard average practice, even if it's a 2 provider practice, it's an owner provider, it's an associate chiropractor, it's a office manager, it's 2 CAs and a tech, and Bob's your uncle. Okay, so that's, don't feel like, oh, I've got to have all 20 of these roles in my practice. That's definitely not the case. That's just, these roles do rock up, and you can use them accordingly to kind of get a sense of what is happening. And obviously the financial piece. So it all started, the entire purpose of this was started with, well, what is the financial element for this role? And that was the first piece of data that we pulled. And then we went, well, okay, I can tell you that the average person in Texas is paying $17 to $18 an hour for a chiropractic assistant. Okay, that's only X helpful. So that's when we went and said, well, what about all the other stuff that we know? What about all the other components? And that's why we built this out into all these different components. Again, doesn't mean that they're all perfect, but hopefully they can help you make sense of that 17. Okay, 17, where the rubber hits the road. And then we take that 17 and we combine that with everyone else. Then we look at our perfect P&L and we go to our growth plan and we look at team and we say, well, how's team doing? Is it good or is it not good? All those little components build their way up to this overall financial performance measurement that we're trying to do in a practice. And we're just trying to give you as much information as we can to make all of those decisions as positive as they can be. This we're gonna update these numbers most likely every 6 months or so. We've got quite a big kind of data formula that we've been using in order to collate all this data and information. And so probably every 6 months, at least minimum every 12 months, we'll run all of our new data through that model, and you may log in and see some tweaks to some of the amounts, and that's just because we're trying to keep it as live and applicable to what's happening in the world. So just keep that in mind.
Adam kind of alluded to the Lucro industry report. So that's going to be launched here very shortly, kind of making some final tweaks, but really what we're trying to come out with for the entire profession is what's working, what's not working, compensation guide. We're going to come out with a pricing guide for all the different services. So you can see what everyone's charging for all the different services across the country, different states. And then, like I said, the overall Lucro guide is really going to give insights of profitability, spending on marketing, spending on team, operations, overheads, what are all the different growth levers and different levels that you can grow and scale to, and what are the different devils at every level as you continue to scale. What can you expect realistically for profit margins, along the way, and what do you need to keep reinvesting in to get to the next level? So that's been my big vision with Lucro from the beginning, to help advance the chiropractic profession to the next level. And now we're really getting to a point where we have the volume, we have the size, where we can really get great insights to be able to make that a reality. So appreciate everybody on this call. If you're not already a client, we'd love to have you schedule a call with us. And if you're already a client, please send your friends to us. Like I said, the more data we have, the more insights, the better value we can give each and every single one of you, right? And so that's really the whole premise that we're trying to operate under is how do you run the most successful clinic possible? What are all the nuances that go into that from a financial perspective? And then how can we give you real, actual data of what the best performing clinics are doing in their practices so that you can model and mimic success for yourself.
Thanks, everyone. Appreciate it. Hope the compensation guide is good. Pricing guide's another one that's coming out soon. The rest of the report, there's lots of stuff. So yeah, look forward to that.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.
Cheers.